The Earth has always been a patient titan, shifting and breathing on timescales so vast that human existence barely registers as a flicker across its surface. For most of our history, we survived only because the planet gave us long, merciful pauses between its upheavals. But imagine a world where that mercy ends, a world where every 10 years, reliably, rhythmically, ruthlessly, a supervolcano erupts somewhere on the planet. A world that never stabilizes, a world forced to live between ashfalls. In such a reality, humanity is stripped of the illusion that the ground beneath our feet is still. The first eruption arrives like a biblical omen. Without warning, the sky dims, turning from soft blue to a toxic metallic gray. Ash blots out the sun. Within hours, temperatures crash. Rain becomes acidic. Rivers choke with debris. Livestock suffocates. Airports shut down. Governments activate emergency broadcasts, but the crisis expands too quickly for any coherent response. Civilization becomes a creature stumbling through darkness, gasping for air. The first days set the tone for the world to come. Modern cities, engineered for convenience, not resilience, become death traps. Ash invades every open surface, clogs air filtration, blinds drivers, corrodes machinery, grinds aircraft engines into useless metal shells. Electricity fails, water treatment collapses. Supply chains disintegrate in hours. Millions flee, forming desperate caravans moving through landscapes that now resemble lunar plains. Some walk until their lungs fill with dust. Others abandon their homes, knowing they will never return. The cooling is immediate. Global temperatures fall sharply as sunlight is absorbed by the ash layer. The planet enters a false winter, a silence of the sun. Crops fail. Photosynthesis slows. Hunger spreads like a contagion. Stockpiles vanish. And as fields vanish beneath meters of ash, humans learn the fragility of agriculture, the quiet dependency that held civilization together. By the end of that first year, survival becomes more than necessity, it becomes culture. A fictional note from a survivor's journal reflects this emerging mindset. We do not plant for the year, we plant for whatever light remains. But the world barely has time to recover before scientists detect something worse, pressure rising beneath multiple supervolcanic systems simultaneously. Yellowstone, Taupo, Toba, Campi Flegrei, Long Valley, the Andean Arc. Magma chambers begin to stir as if synchronized by some planetary metronome. Humanity realizes the nightmare has only begun. It is no longer a matter of a single eruption, but a cycle. A 10-year countdown becomes the new clock of civilization. People no longer count years, they count eruptions. 10 years after the first event, just as the sky clears and agriculture tentatively returns, the second eruption strikes. This time, humanity is not surprised, but it is still unprepared. The ash descends again. Crops collapse again. Migrations begin again. Republics topple as citizens lose faith in institutions. Dictators rise, promising stability. Economies implode under the weight of short-term planning. No policy can outpace the mantle. The rhythm becomes deadly. Rebuild, stabilize, prepare, collapse. Empires last as long as a childhood. Innovation fragments. Sciences advance rapidly in the quiet years and die abruptly under ash. Democracy becomes fragile, often unable to survive an entire cycle. Institutions turn defensive, obsessed not with progress, but with stockpiling. Geography reshapes society. The United States fractures into regional states as federal power thins. The East Coast becomes a fortress of domes, the West a corridor of climate refugees. Europe splits, North sealed behind filtration towers, South transformed into an ash basin. China hardens into a centralized ash dynasty, building subterranean megacities. India suffers catastrophic monsoon failures. Africa turns to mobile, decentralized survival networks rooted in pre-colonial flexibility. Australia pioneers sealed habitat cities, while New Zealand lives beneath the dread of Taupo. Geology defines geopolitics. Society reorganizes into what later historians call cycle states, governments built explicitly around the 10-year eruption rhythm. Their decade fractures into 4 strict phases: the reconstruction years, the growth years, the stockpiling years, and finally, the ash year, an annual calamity so ingrained in memory that even children recite its rituals. But human psychology begins to crack long before the infrastructure does. Trauma becomes generational. Public trust erodes. Short-term thinking becomes instinct. Religion mutates into apocalyptic cults. Some worship the mantle as divine judgment. Others believe humanity must embrace the eruptions as sacred cleansing events. Education compresses. Children finish basic schooling by 8 before the next ash year disrupts everything. A chilling fictional note from the Ash Clinic reads, "Children no longer draw houses, they draw shelters." That line becomes the theme of a generation. By the 4th eruption, humanity clings to survival, but the 5th eruption changes everything. Not because it is larger, but because it arrives after 40 years of accumulated exhaustion. Ash layers from previous cycles still coat continents. Oceans, destabilized by repeated chemical shocks, fail to recover. Fisheries vanish. Coral reefs turn skeletal. Storms intensify. And global reserves of food, fuel, and medicine, slowly shrinking with each cycle, reach the breaking point. The 5th eruption becomes known as the Great Breaking. It is the moment humanity realizes that adaptation is not resilience. A report from that era summarizes it starkly. The eruption is moderate. Its impact is catastrophic. Our reserves are 1/4 of what is needed. Farmlands freeze simultaneously. The American Midwest, Eastern Europe, Argentina's Pampas, China's northern plains. No region can compensate for the others. Starvation spreads on a scale unseen since the dawn of humanity. Billions begin to walk. Borders crumble as nations lose control. Governments shrink into isolated islands of authority surrounded by oceans of chaos. Universities close. Archives crumble. Research halts. Humanity slips into a fragmented, medieval-like patchwork of city-states, nomad territories, isolated enclaves, and collapsed zones. Yet from this devastation, 3 divergent paths of survival emerge, each shaped by necessity, geography, and ideology. The first path leads underground. Societies with the resources and engineering capabilities carve colossal subterranean cities lit by bioluminescent plantations, powered by geothermal grids, reinforced against ash storms, and stocked with seed vaults and knowledge archives. In these deep warrens, humanity becomes monastic, ordered, disciplined, scientifically focused. A preserved inscription from the Spiral City's charter states, "The surface is memory, the mantle is future." The second path traverses the surface. Migratory macro-tribes roam the continents in armored convoys, constantly moving to chase the last remnants of stable climate. They survive by mobility, salvaging materials, and maintaining portable greenhouses. They become cultures of motion, united by a single creed: stillness is death. The third path rises above the ash. Skyward cultures construct floating platforms, high-altitude rings, and cities built atop towering structures piercing the gray shroud. In these heights, sunlight still reaches. Science resumes. Philosophy revives. Children grow up seeing the sun as a rare, precious miracle. A line from the Stratosclene Testament reads, "We live between the fire and the void, and yet we endure." By the end of the 8th eruption, representatives of these 3 human worlds finally meet again. Mantle observatories buried deep underground detect patterns, pressure waves repeating with uncanny symmetry. Humanity begins to ask a forbidden question: can the cycle be broken? And for the first time in generations, the species dares to hope. The meeting in Antarctica becomes the closest thing humanity has to a second dawn. Delegates from the sunless cities, the skyward cultures, and the nomadic tribes gather in a sealed refuge above a continent turned to ice. They sit around a table carved from glacial stone. Scientists, tribal elders, sky engineers, subterranean archivists, all survivors of a century of darkness. Their goal is not peace, not unity, not even redemption. Their goal is survival. The mantle observatories have revealed a shocking symmetry. The eruptions aren't random. The pressure waves have a repeating pattern, rising, falling, cycling with brutal precision. Humanity realizes the cycle might not be eternal. It might be breakable. And so the three civilizations agree on something unprecedented, a project not to save themselves, but to save the world itself. They call it the Mantle Regulator, a planetary pacemaker, a system designed not to withstand eruptions, but to prevent them entirely. The idea is audacious. Build a global network of geothermal conduits, pressure sinks, stabilizing chambers, and heat redistribution systems that reach into the lithosphere, relieving strain before it accumulates. Humanity has never attempted something so large. Not even the megacities or sky platforms compare. Construction begins during the 9th interval. The world is still reeling from famine and climate collapse, but necessity becomes fuel. The deep cities provide engineers and tunneling machines capable of carving miles beneath the crust. The sky cultures beam solar power from floating platforms to the drilling towers below. The nomadic tribes transport materials across dead continents, carrying alloys and equipment through lands where no settled population remains. The planet becomes a workshop. Humanity, once fragmented by ash, now unites under a single purpose: to calm the Earth. Generations live and die during this enduring construction. Entire cultures evolve around the grand project. Children in the deep cities are taught not fairy tales, but tectonics. Skyborn youth grow up watching solar harvesters ignite at dawn over the gray horizon. Nomadic tribes carve their own symbols of purpose into the sides of mantle shafts, knowing that though they wander, their contributions remain rooted deep within the earth. The 12th and 13th eruptions still come, but each one hits a world more coordinated than before. The regulator expands. Mantle observatories refine their models. Data flows upward through fiber tunnels and skybeam mirrors. Humanity becomes a species of geologic engineers, sculpting the planet like ancient ants tending a hive. But the 14th eruption nearly destroys the project. A pressure anomaly beneath the Indian Ocean triggers a blast twice the size of the previous cycle. Ash clouds blanket the equator. Deep cities lose several volts. Sky platforms drift and collide in turbulent winds. Entire nomadic convoys disappear. For a moment, humanity teeters once more on the edge of extinction. Yet the project survives, and so does the species. After the disaster, the regulator expands with renewed urgency. Tunnels grow deeper. Pressure sinks widen. The very crust of the Earth becomes threaded with human engineering. Some cultures question the ethics of altering the planet. Others insist the mantle was never meant to erupt this often, that something destabilized it long before humanity intervened. But debate fades in the shadow of necessity. Billions depend on the project's success. By the 17th interval, the mantle regulator becomes the largest structure humanity has ever built. It spans continents beneath the surface and extends upward through towers in the sky. The equatorial ring anchors its power grid. Subterranean hubs monitor every tremor. Skyborne stations track thermal flux at the stratospheric edge. It is no longer a single machine. It is an ecosystem of engineering woven into the planet itself. And then, silence. As the 20th eruption window approaches, the world waits. Children born into the 17th interval have never known peace. Adults have survived 5 or 6 ash years. Elders bear scars of entire civilizations lost. Every generation stands on edge as year 10 approaches. People gather in sky citadels, underground plazas, nomadic camps, watching the horizon for the familiar plume, waiting for the ash to rise. But the sky remains clear, day by day, week by week, month by month. The planet does not erupt. Mantle observatories send frantic updates, pressure levels decreasing, heat channels stabilizing, seismic pulses flattening into rhythm. Then one message appears, quiet and understated, yet monumental. The planet is breathing evenly again. Humanity does not celebrate, not at first. Suspicion runs deep after centuries of crisis. But as seasons pass without the familiar winter of ash, hope begins to return. Sunlight strengthens. Forests regrow at equatorial latitudes. Grass pushes through blackened soil. Rivers clear. Fish return to coastlines long thought dead. Children play without masks for the first time in generations. The deep cities open their gates cautiously, letting citizens walk the surface in daylight. The nomadic tribes slow their caravans, settling temporarily in valleys where green shoots break through old gray dunes. Sky platforms descend slightly, no longer needing to hover above the ash layer. The world begins to heal, but not revert. Humanity has changed too much. Cultures shaped by darkness do not forget the lessons carved into their bones. The deep cities, having lived for centuries beneath stone and pressure, maintain their archives and geothermal sanctuaries. They become memory keepers, ensuring the knowledge of the ash intervals is never lost again. The nomads keep traveling in smaller patterns, believing motion itself is a form of survival. The sky cultures remain aloft in part, studying atmosphere, stars, and the lingering scars in global circulation. But a new era emerges, a world no longer shaped by eruptions, but what the eruptions forged. Economies rebuild slowly, based on energy grids intertwined with the mantle regulator. Trade routes reopen, though cautiously. Nations reassemble with new philosophies, governments that do not claim permanence but responsibility. Long-term strategies replace frantic decade cycles. Children learn history not of their tribes alone, but of the entire species. And when historians look back on this age, they see a truth more profound than the ending of the ash cycle. The eruptions did not merely devastate humanity, they reshaped it, forcing societies to abandon complacency, to respect the planet, to value knowledge as sacred, to collaborate when collaboration felt impossible. A historian from the deep cities writes in her final chronicle, "The eruptions did not destroy civilization, they destroyed the version of civilization that could not have survived them. What rose from the ash was something more adaptable, more aware, more human." The mantle regulator becomes a symbol of unity, not of domination over the earth, but of coexistence. The species understands now that stability is earned, not guaranteed, that peace is not the absence of catastrophe, but the presence of preparation, that survival is not luck, but adaptation. And so the story of the ash intervals ends not with humanity's extinction, but with a shift in identity. The world becomes quieter, but humanity remains vigilant. The memory of ash is written into culture, architecture, myth, and law. Every child learns why their ancestors carved cities beneath mountains, floated above the clouds, or walked through oceans of dust. Civilization evolves, the planet stabilizes, and in the quiet that follows, humanity embraces a truth older than any empire. We are not defined by the disasters we endure. We are defined by what we build after the sky grows dark, and by the will to rise when the world falls silent.